It's 2 a.m. in Manhattan, the 43rd floor of 200 West Street. The view over the Hudson is stunning, but nobody's looking at it. In a conference room soaked in cold fluorescent light, a 22-year-old stares at a screen. He's fixing one line in a financial model, just one line. That line is the valuation of a $6 billion company. A misplaced decimal, and tomorrow's story changes completely. Nobody knows his name. Not yet, but he does. He knows that in this bank specifically, the rules are different. Since 1869, Goldman Sachs hasn't simply been a financial institution. It's a religion. A closed hierarchy, jealously guarded, where you enter with dreams of millions and leave 15 years later, then with something far harder to quantify. Tonight, we follow that young man, step by step, dollar by dollar, sacrifice by sacrifice. Because the story nobody tells you is what Goldman Sachs takes in return for what it gives. Because the story nobody tells you is what Goldman Sachs takes in return for what it gives. Welcome to Goldman Sachs. You're 22. You went to Harvard, Wharton, or LSE. You survived 3 rounds of interviews, case studies, market simulations. Out of roughly 300,000 global applications this year, around 3,000 people were selected. You're one of them. On your first day, they hand you a badge, and with that badge, an identity. Analyst, Division, Investment Banking. The first 2 weeks are an intensive training program in New York. They teach you how to build financial models, DCFs, LBOs, comparable company analyses, tools you may have known in theory. But here you learn to execute them under pressure, fast, without mistakes. Then the real work starts. Your typical day begins at 8 a.m. It rarely ends before midnight. Often it's 2 or 3 in the morning. Weekends stop existing as a concept of rest. They simply become days when emails arrive slightly slower. You build presentations called pitch books. Dozens of pages, sometimes over 100, designed to convince a CEO to sell his company or acquire someone else's. You spend hours on formatting, on table alignment, on color consistency. Because at Goldman, even the aesthetics of a document signal rigor, and you learn the unwritten rules very fast. Never leave before your senior analyst. Never say you're tired. Reply to messages within 10 minutes, no matter the hour. And above all, above everything, never let a mistake slip through a document that leaves your team. Because Goldman Sachs has a reputation, and you are its last line of defense. The pay? Around $110,000 base salary. The bonus in a solid first year can bring the total to $150,000 or $180,000. More than most people earn in a decade at 22 years old. But the invisible tax has already started running. You miss your best friend's birthday. You cancel family dinners. You scroll through Instagram watching your friends post travel photos while you revise a model for the 3rd time because a managing director decided at 11 p.m. to change the growth assumptions. You tell yourself, it's temporary. It's the price you pay. And you're right. But nobody tells you yet how long you'll keep paying it. Level 2. Associate, $330 to $615. Total compensation, $250,000 to $400,000. 2 or 3 years pass. If you survived, and many don't, roughly a third of analysts leave Goldman within 18 months. You're offered a promotion. Or you leave for an MBA at Harvard Business School, Wharton, or LBS, and you come back. You're now an associate. The shift is subtle but fundamental. You no longer build every cell yourself. You supervise the analysts who build them. You review, you correct. You're now the one sending red comments back at midnight. And you realize something strange. You've become the person you used to fear. But the associate role is primarily the first level where you start seeing the true nature of the work. The deals, real negotiations, client calls, and you discover a reality that no financial model had prepared you for. The numbers are the easy part. What determines whether Goldman wins a mandate is rarely the quality of the model. It's the relationship. It's the fact that the managing director and the company's CFO have been playing golf together for 10 years. It's trust. Ego. The internal politics of the board of directors. You begin to understand that finance at the highest level is a human contact sport disguised as an exact science. Your compensation has climbed between $250,000 and $400,000, depending on the year, on the bank's performance, on the generosity of the bonus pool. It's a number that feels abstract, and yet you have no time to spend it. You rent an apartment in Tribeca that you only see when you sleep. You order every meal. You take Ubers at 3 a.m. because the subway requires waiting, and you don't wait. You work during the commute. One colleague, an associate like you for the past 6 months, warns you one evening in the elevator. The promotion window to VP is narrow, very narrow. And here, when you don't make the cut, they don't tell you to your face. One day, your name is simply no longer on the list. You nod. You go home. And you work for 2 more hours before falling asleep. If you've survived Goldman's natural selection, and by this point many of your peers have left for hedge funds, private equity, or tech companies, you reach the rank of vice president. This title at Goldman is both less and more impressive than it sounds. There are hundreds of VPs in the bank. It's a middle rank, not yet the summit. But this is where the pressure reaches a new level. Because as a VP, you are responsible for everything. Without having the power to decide everything, you manage deals from start to finish, from the first pitch to the signing. You're the one who gets the call at 2 a.m. when something goes wrong in a transaction. You're the one who has to explain to a client why the timeline has slipped. You're the one holding together a team of exhausted analysts and a managing director who changes his mind every 48 hours. And here, for the first time, the question that changes everything starts to surface. Not, can you execute a deal, but can you find one? This is the invisible line that separates those who will stay from those who will leave. Goldman doesn't just want people capable of excellent execution. Goldman wants people capable of bringing in money, clients, mandates. And that's a completely different muscle. Execution, selling, really selling, building relationships over 10 years, convincing a CEO to trust you with the most important transaction of his life. Nobody taught you that in a classroom. Your compensation now exceeds $500,000. In a good year, it can touch $900,000, a number that seemed to belong to a different world when you were 22. But the personal cost has become impossible to ignore. You may have a partner now, maybe children, and you realize you're never really there. Even when you're physically present, your phone buzzes. Your mind is somewhere else. On a deal clause, on a missed call from a client in Zurich. Your colleagues do the same. Nobody talks about it, because talking about it would mean admitting the cost is real. And in this culture, that's a form of weakness. Total compensation, $800,000 to $1 million, $400,000. You're around 35. Executive Director, the antechamber of the summit. At this stage, a silent transformation has taken place in your relationship with work. You no longer really execute, you hunt. Your calendar looks like a flight itinerary. New York to London, London to Dubai, Dubai to Hong Kong. Dinners with CFOs, breakfast with boards of directors, networking events where everyone knows nobody is there for pleasure, but everyone pretends otherwise. You're selling Goldman Sachs. You're selling the brand, the reputation, the network. And then a thought begins creeping in. One you try to smother, but which comes back at night when you're alone in a hotel room in Singapore. Would these clients call me if I worked somewhere else? You know the answer. No, not all of them. Many are there for the name on your business card, for access to Goldman's resources, for the prestige of having Goldman Sachs as their advisor. You're no longer sure whether your value belongs to you or to the bank. And that question will define everything that comes next. Your compensation now sits in a category of its own, between $800,000 and $1.4 million, depending on the year. A growing portion is paid in deferred stock over 3, 4, 5 years. The official term is deferred compensation. Its real name is a golden leash. Because leaving means leaving hundreds of thousands of dollars on the table. The system doesn't retain you through loyalty. It retains you through mathematics. Total compensation, $1,500,000 to $4 million plus 15 years. Maybe 16. One morning, an email arrives. Short, formal. Your name is on the list. You are a managing director at Goldman Sachs. It wasn't your boss who promoted you. It was a committee. Dozens of people who reviewed your file, your revenue numbers, your client relationships, your internal reputation. Every year, Goldman names a handful of MDs out of thousands of eligible candidates. It is one of the most competitive selections in global finance. That evening, you order a good bottle of wine. You call your family, and for a few hours, everything feels worth it. The next morning, you're back at work, because at Goldman, an MD is above all the revenue line. Your title has changed. The expectations have climbed again. You must now generate, not just manage. Generate. Every quarter, they look at what you've brought in. Mandates, transactions, revenue. If you don't deliver, the title won't protect you. Goldman has no sentimentality about this. The story nobody tells you about managing directors is what happens after the promotion. Because Goldman, like all major banks, restructures regularly. Teams merge, divisions reorganize. And sometimes an MD who was just named finds himself 18 months later inside a team that no longer fits him. His juniors are reassigned, his clients shared, his territory gradually eroded. He's still an MD on paper, but operationally he's been sidelined, and his deferred shares still hold him in place. Leaving means losing. Staying means waiting. Waiting for what? A comeback? Another restructuring that restores his position? Or simply a conversation that's been postponed for too long? This trap, this golden cage, may be the true legacy of 15 years at Goldman Sachs. Not the millions. Not the prestige. The fact that you built an entire life around an institution and realized one morning that the institution never built anything around you. Let's go back to that young man. 43rd floor, 2 a.m. He finishes correcting his model. He sends the file. He gets an automated read receipt. He closes his laptop, picks up his coat, and rides the elevator alone down to the street. Outside Manhattan keeps moving. Horns, lights, the river in the distance. He takes an Uber home. He sleeps 4 hours. He starts again. Goldman Sachs, like Morgan Stanley, like every great institution in high finance, isn't selling you a job. It's selling you an identity, a feeling of belonging to something larger than yourself. And that identity, that feeling, is powerful enough to justify, for 15 years, sacrifices you would never have accepted if someone had laid them all out in front of you on day one. The system is intelligent, not cruel. Intelligent. It never asks for everything at once. It asks for a little more each year, until the day you look back and finally see what the entire journey cost. Is it worth it? That's the wrong question. The right question is, for whom is it worth it? Because for some people, this life makes complete sense. The intensity, the competition, the billion-dollar deals, it's their natural environment. And for them, Goldman Sachs is exactly what it should be. But for many others, the real cost only becomes visible at the end. When the kids grew up without you, when the friendships quietly faded, when you realize that the identity you spent 15 years building belongs as much to Goldman as it does to you. The system recruits. It doesn't retain loyalty. It rents your time, your energy, your best years, at a price hidden behind the promise of compensation. And the next time you see that young analyst in the elevator at midnight, fresh badge around his neck, eyes bright with ambition, you'll know exactly what he doesn't know yet. If you want to see the comparison, I broke down the same 15-year climb at Morgan Stanley, and the trap at the top is even more silent. That video is right here.